So we're going to be going over how you can add Apollo to your Next.js project. Now to do this, we're going to be follow along with the example that Next.js has in their examples repo. We're going to be using the with Apollo auth repo example, and we're going to be adding two things onto it. One, it's currently in JavaScript, so we're going to be converting it to TypeScript. And secondly, we're going to be changing how it sends the header. So our server expects us to send a cookie for authentication. So we're going to send our token as a cookie and not as a authentication header. We're going to send in a cookie header. Anyway, I didn't explicitly mention this in the last video, and I think it's very good to know about. These examples that I'm getting this from is in a giant repo that Next.js has, where it has tons of examples of how to integrate Next.js with lots of different libraries. So I definitely recommend checking this out if there's other libraries you want to try integrating in. Next.js probably has an example of how to do it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this though. So we're going to first start by just going into the lib file, and then we're going to grab each one of these files and convert it over. So we'll start with the with Apollo one. So I'm going to copy this, and we're just going to add a lib folder. And we're going to say with Apollo. And we're going to paste this in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to fix all the red that we see. Now before we can do any of that really, we first need to fix this. So we need to add the init Apollo file. All right, so we can go to lib and copy this as well. All right, so first off, we need to install a few things. So why don't we open up our console, and I'm going to say yarn add Apollo boost, Apollo link, and then also Apollo link context, and this isomorphic unfetch. All right, so the first one is it doesn't recognize the property browser on process. So what I usually do is I say const is browser, and then I say process.browser, and then I cast this to anything, and then I say this is a boolean. That way I don't have to cast this to any all over the place whenever I want to use the .browser. So then I'll just say is browser. And then here you can either also ignore. So you could say tsignore when you're adding properties like this to, so we're adding the fetch property to global, and we want this to happen. So we can either just ignore it because it is correct, or we can just cast it to anything. So either one of those will work. I'll usually cast it to any. Then we're just going to replace here every place that we see process.browser, we can just replace it with our isBrowser function that we created. And we'll go ahead and replace that. All right, so there's really nothing else errors that we see in this particular file, but that's mainly because we have really loose TypeScript settings right now. So all this is defined as any, and if we wanted to, we could get more strict, which personally I'm a fan of. So we can go to our tsconfig and we can turn strict on, strict. I'm gonna set to true, and I think maybe we have some non-null possibly that we can set. Strict null checks, we're gonna say to true, and no implicit any true, no implicit returns true as well. So those are a couple ones that we can make this a little stricter. And then if I say restart TypeScript server, so I just hit Command Shift P, and that brings up this little window, and then I can say TypeScript restart server while I'm inside the init Apollo file. What that's going to do is it's going to restart, and it's going to reread the tsconfig file we just changed, and now it's going to see that we made some changes here. So our Apollo client here, you'll notice we are down here going to initialize it, and we're calling create on it, which returns a Apollo client. So we can just copy the type definition here. And I got that by just hovering over this. And we can use that up here. And I'm hitting Control and Spacebar to bring up the autocomplete here, and we can import that from Apollo Boost. So the type of this is either we're going to have an Apollo client or it's going to be null. The initial state is going to be any, because this is basically, I believe, the cache, and so the cache is going to have pretty much anything inside of it. Get token we're going to talk about more in a second, so we're going to come back to the type definition for this. So we talked about anything. Let's see what options is. So we pass in options here, we pass in options here, and it looks like the only option that we're supporting is this get token. So at the top here, I'm going to create an interface, which I'm going to call options. And this is where we're going to pass in our get token. So right now we know it's an a function that returns a string. And I don't know if we have to pass any parameters to it at some point. We'll come back to that. All right, so the file is now fully typed, or at least TypeScript is not complaining anymore. So now we can move on to the with Apollo file. So it's no longer complaining about init Apollo. Let's go ahead and add the cookie package and React Apollo. About the cookie package, we may need to install types for this. I can't remember whether or not it comes with it, but we'll be able to see it. And again, you'll see how we added the packages, but it hasn't updated yet, or it just updated. You can also restart the TypeScript server here if you want to do that. So it looks like we need to add the types for cookie, because we can still see it's red. All right, so app, I like to just say this is any. Context, we may change what this is at some point. For now, I'm going to say it's any. I missed request. I think I can just say request maybe. I don't think we want it for node fetch. Usually this is coming from express package or something, but we're not installing request or express, I mean. I think you may be able to get this from the node package, but I'm not exactly sure where you get it. So I'm just going to say any for now, because I'm not sure where this request object type would be from. All right, so we can use the isBrowser that we are using over here to handle that. So I could extract this isBrowser into its own little file if I wanted to, so I can use it all over the place. All right, so we'll copy this. And now we can use isBrowser anywhere we want. And we can import this, hit command and then period to bring up this window. All right, so now I can use isBrowser here. And again, we can just replace all process.browser with the isBrowser. All right, the get tree is missing. Oh, I need to rename this to .tsx file because we have JSX in here. So that's what that was complaining about. And then we just need to import isBrowser. All right, at the bottom here, props is going to be anything. Parse cookie, I'm not sure where that's coming from. Is that our function here? So what is that complaining about? Expected arguments, but didn't pass any in. All right, we'll see why we're not passing this in a second, I guess. I guess the request is not going to be available there, so I guess we should say this can sometimes not be passed in. And by the way, if you're not too familiar with TypeScript, the question mark right here means that this is an optional parameter you can pass in. And then here we set the default value of options, so that's automatically optional as well. All right, so the last thing that we have to add a type definition is for this Apollo client, which we can hover over this and see that we're getting a Apollo client cache. So we can just come up here and we can say Apollo client is equal to this. And now we can import all missing imports. Okay, so we made a whole lot of changes to these two files to make them TypeScript, and it looks like we fixed all the issues. So that was the main bulk of what we needed to do. Why don't we add this two last things? The first one is redirect. So copy this, redirect.ts, we'll rename it. And we're going to go over what these files do in just a second. Context, I'm going to say is any for now. Again, we're going to maybe define something for context later. Target, I believe, is a string. And it looks like we're passing it to location and then also router.replace, which takes a string. All right, so let's see what their check logged in does. I can't remember if we need that right now. Okay, so they're actually just calling Apollo client right here, so we don't need this right now. All right, so the next one thing we need to do is if we go back to the main page, and I believe it's under pages, we want to create an app.js. So what this is going to do is we're going to wrap our entire project in Apollo provider. And the way you do that in Next.js is by implementing the underscore app. So let's go to our pages. I'm going to say app.ts. And, this should be .tsx. And again, so when we're using this file, this is going to be added to every single page. So whether we're on the about page, the list page, it's going to wrap that component or that page with whatever we put here. So here we're just going to say the Apollo client. Basically the props can be anything. Can I just pass any here? Yeah, cool. And then we're just export defaulting it. So here, basically, we are rendering whatever component the page is, and then we're just wrapping it with the Apollo provider, passing in the Apollo client, which is added for us in the props. Now, it's added for us with this with Apollo higher order component, which we added. So let's go back over through this code real quick that we just added. So this is a higher order component. You can see it takes an app, which is this React class right here. And what it does is it returns that class with some stuff inside of it. So it's going to add this get initial props. And the important part about get initial props in Next.js is this gets run before your page gets rendered. So what it's going to do is it looks like it's initializing the Apollo client here. And it's calling init Apollo to do that. So if we go to what init Apollo does, you'll notice what this is doing is it's just actually creating the Apollo client itself. So first thing we can do also in this is in the create right here, we can replace it with the URL to our server. So I want it to go to our server to be localhost 3000. And then credentials, I'm going to say include. And you can, again, actually this should be 4000, not 3000. This should be pointing at your server. So if your server is running on a different port or a different URL, you can change that to that. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is this is how that we are adding any kind of stuff to the header. Is we're using the set context from Apollo. You'll notice it's calling get token and it's adding a header. So they are grabbing a token here and they are passing the token in the header. So for us, I'm going to say cookie. And then if we get a token, I'm going to say QID. So this is the name of the cookie that the server is expecting. So I called it QID. So I'm going to pass that in there. And here is going to be the value of the cookie. So this get token function is getting passed from with Apollo. And you'll notice what it's doing is it's parsing the cookies or parsing the request. And it's grabbing the .token cookie from it. Which we don't actually care about. We care about .qid. And this may be a little bit off. We're not going to be testing the parsing of cookies today and making sure those work. But this will get us to a very close place. And then when we do authentication in a few days and we worry about parsing cookies, we'll come back to this if we need to make any changes. But the idea is we're going to parse the request for any cookies, and we're going to send those cookies when we do server-side rendering calling that get token that gets passed in through all these functions. So again, init Apollo is creating the Apollo client itself, and with Apollo is at the top, using that to create the initial state. After that, the next really important thing to look at is the get data from tree. What this is going to do is it's going to go through your application and it's going to run any query components that you have in there. And basically it's going to store all the data in the cache. Reason why is when the page first renders, it's now going to have all the data cached, and so it's going to have a nice server-side rendering effect where everything is loaded. But again, we'll get back to this when we actually load something. We'll see this for real. So that's pretty much the gist of what's going on in these two files. So with Apollo is basically you get creating the Apollo client, and also it's passing it in the context for us. This is important because we can access that later. All right, so that is all I kind of wanted to go over with these two files. I want to just test it really quickly. If we go to their pages and we go to, say, the sign-in page, we can use the same thing that they're using here. Actually, it doesn't even look like they're using the mutation component here, but we're going to be. So I'm going to add this to the index page. So I'm going to just create a button that says call login mutation. And this is just an example. So what I did is I went to localhost 4000/GraphQL. So this is where our server is running. And I just typed up a dummy login mutation to make sure Apollo works. And when I run this, we get the login as null. This is expected results because this is not the correct email and password to log in. All right, so I'm going to copy this, and we're going to say mutation. And this is going to be a render prop that we're going to wrap here. And so you'll notice we have curly braces there, and we have a function that returns the button. So here I'm going to say mutation, and we're going to say GQL, and then we're going to paste it in. And again, we're just using this for testing purposes. We can import this from Apollo Boost. And then this is going to pass us a mutation function, and we can call that onClick. So I'm going to say const response is equal to await the mutation. Make this asynchronous so I can use async and await. And we're going to console log the response. All right, so here's my server. I don't think it's running right now, so I just need to say yarn dev. If I were to refresh this, we should get nothing. So I'll let this start up. We forgot to add something. Oh, we need to install GraphQL itself. And also when adding GraphQL, we need to add the types for GraphQL as well. All right, so let's restart this. And we'll let this build. Looks like it's compiling better this time. Refresh. And now when I click on this button, we should be able to see the request itself. We can go to the network tab if we want to. Again, click call login. Okay, so we can see that this sent a post request, and it looks like it just got a 404 error. That's because I put the wrong URL. So I said this server was running at /GraphQL, and in my with Apollo, or sorry, init Apollo, I did not add that. So I just did this. So we'll say /GraphQL, give us a save, and you can, if you open up the console fast enough, you'll see it recompile, and we can call this again. And this looks like we got a better response from the server. So if I look over here, I can see the response from the server if I want. I can see that's what I expect back. I can also see the console over here. We don't get anything interesting here. I mean, we get some CORS issues. We're gonna have to deal with CORS issues in a different video. So this actually failed here, but I can see it working in the network response here. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder if, I'm not sure why that happens. Maybe it still sends the request. Anyway, we'll fix the CORS issue in a future video, guys. That's it for this one. So that is how you can set up Apollo with Next.js, is adding those components that we did.